Thank you very much. Forgive me, I'm going to use a metaphor. Snow blindness is caused by the enormous reflection from snow or ice. It's a temporary condition that causes a loss of vision due to the overwhelming power of reflected light. Now, much like Gallipoli or Sir John Monash in Australia, there are two things, one person and one event, that outshine the rest of Canada's First World War history. Those two are, of course, Sir Arthur Currie and Vimy Ridge. Sir Arthur Currie, the real estate developer and insurance broker turned soldier, is in one way or another at the centre of much Canadian First World War historiography. His story is one well known and often told because it has all the elements that make for a great tale. There's the drama of his pre-war dealings and the embezzlement of military funds to cover his mounting debts. There's his time as a brigade commander during the Second Battle of Ypres, to his promotion to command the 1st Canadian Division, and his part in the Battle of Vimy Ridge. This led to his eventual command of the Canadian Corps and the outstanding parts they played in the Battle of Amiens and the 100 Days Offensive. Interspersed between these momentous events are his political battle with the erstwhile Canadian Minister of Militia and Defence, Sam Hughes, and then the struggle when two of Currie's subordinates discovered his financial problems and their combined attempts to solve them before knowledge of his indiscretions were made public. This is a story that even extends beyond the war itself and only finishes in the 1920s with a highly publicised libel suit launched by Currie on a Canadian newspaper friendly to his nemesis Hughes. It's a story that plays well to modern sensibilities, and as more than one commentator has noted, Currie is that most beloved of combinations, a good general and a colonial. He can easily be portrayed as the opposite of Alan Clark's donkey generals. The Battle of Vimy Ridge is the other blinding light in the realm of Canadian war writing. Seen in much the same way that Gallipoli is in Australia and New Zealand, Vimy Ridge exemplifies the spirit of Canadian martial and national valour. This was even noted at the time, with the Canadian Director of Medical Services, Brigadier A.E. Ross, writing, "In those few minutes, I witnessed the birth of a nation." Vimy, part of the wider Battle of Arras, was the high point of the British involvement in the French Nivelle Offensive. On 9 April 1917, the 4 Canadian divisions and 1 British division attacked the strongly defended Vimy Ridge, and after 3 days of horrific fighting, they held the heights. It was also the first time that all 4 Canadian divisions, containing men from every region of Canada, had gone into battle side by side. And despite the 10,000 casualties they took, the attack was a success. Given its significance at the time, and since, the story of Vimy has been written, rewritten, dissected and discussed from every conceivable angle for more than a century now. A cursory search on Trove returns over 300 book results for Vimy, covering the full range of academic history and popular history to novels to plays. While the day may not be commemorated, or perhaps celebrated, in the same way that Anzac Day is, it remains a potent symbol of Canadian sentiment and national identity. Now, if one shades their eyes from the blinding light of Currie and Vimy, they will find a collection of people waiting to be rediscovered. But the question remains that why have these senior commanders and administrators of the CEF not yet been examined? Canadian historian J.L. Granatstein addresses this question in the Oxford Companion to Canadian Military History, as part of the broader dearth of military biography in Canada. He draws attention to the lack of quality historians researching Canadian officers and the shortage of both public and publisher interest in their stories. Of the attention given to Canadian soldiers, most tends towards stories of action and heroism beloved by popular audiences. The other would be Winnie the Pooh, who was originally a bear mascot of a Canadian regiment. When biography is seldomly addressed by more skilled historians, they lack the readability or flair of the popular authors. Granatstein says, "In the ceaseless bleat of military historians, or of non-historians who write reams of historical doggerel, unfazed by lack of skill, to be taken seriously by their peers, it would help at times to simply write better history, or to expose those politely who do not." But though style may be lacking, this isn't sufficient to answer the question of why Canadian commanders of the CEF, or study of senior Canadian officers in general, remain so underrepresented. On the bright side, the last 2 decades have seen growth in academic studies of Canadian command, particularly by historians like William Stewart with his 2015 book The Embattled General on the somewhat unlucky Richard Turner, commander of Canadian 2 Division, Likewise, Patrick Brennan of the University of Calgary brought up this very question in a 2002 article, and has perhaps done the most to advance the cause in this regard. He has published several pieces on senior commanders of the CEF, covering battalion commanders, a brigadier, and a divisional commander. None of this work, however, has been longer than a journal article. A number of other historians, such as Douglas Delaney, Stephen Harris, and Kenneth Radley, have all done some research in the area of Canadian command, but only as one part of a larger work. What is yet to be done is a broader and deeper look at the men who occupied these key positions in the CEF. The hierarchical nature of the military means that it's vital to understand how the command system operates, and how the personalities, skills, and experiences of the men in command are applied to the organisation under them. In Australia, over the last few decades, historians have put considerable effort into studying the men who commanded the divisions of the AIF, with most of these generals receiving biographies, and Monash, like Curry, receiving several. Questions regarding individual generals, their personal command philosophy, and how that translated into the administration, training, and fighting of their divisions remain to be asked, let alone answered. Most of the constituent parts of the Canadian military have been examined in some detail, but its generals, by and large, have received less research than its chaplains. Without an understanding of the men at the top of the heap, our understanding of the organisation is incomplete. This is one area in which there is still much work to be done, with only 2 of the 8 Canadian divisional commanders having received a book-length treatment. Here you can see the 6 that haven't. More conspicuous research has been put in by New Zealander Christopher Pugsley, who in his work has looked at the Dominions, comparing Australian, New Zealand, and Canadian wartime experience. Command has factored largely in his comparison of the 3 Dominions, and his analysis has deepened our understanding of the many similarities, but more interestingly, the vast differences in the Dominions at war. Research such as this, looking at these officers in comparison to one another and in the context of the war they're collectively fighting, is one potentially fruitful area of research for the future. Now, my own research falls in just this area, and I'm hoping that it will go some way to filling this gap. The project is an analysis of British and Dominion divisional commanders, looking at both their military and their personal lives. One area I'm particularly interested in is in the informal social networks that underpin the Edwardian armies of the British Empire. They were often formed in the early years of these men's careers, during their times as junior officers in the regiments or at Staff College in Camberley-Orchetta, and serving on the staffs of senior officers. Maintained through copious amounts of correspondence, these networks spanned the entire empire as officers were sent from Britain to the Dominions and colonies. With the advent of the Imperial General Staff and Dominion officers spending time with the British Army, along with the practice of seasoned British officers acting as Inspector Generals or advisors to colonial militaries, these informal networks grew to encompass officers from every corner of the empire. In this way, relationships were formed and networks grew that enabled the disparate armies of the British Empire to build not only a level of interoperability, but also a level of cultural and gentlemanly conduct that benefited its participants. Thus, when the CEF and the AIF, or NZEF for that matter, went to war in 1914, the British generals who ended up in charge of Dominion troops were often already familiar with at least some of the men now under their command. These unofficial networks within the officer corps of the Imperial armies were important to the military prospects of officers seeking promotion, and they mattered to the smooth running of general staffs. How far promotions were questions of merit and professional skill, and how much patronage and relationships still mattered, is another question that needs to be asked, even if it can't be satisfactorily answered. The lack of work on Canadian command is not due to the absence of primary records, although some key individuals didn't leave many papers, but is due more to difficulties in access. Canada is a large country, and with comparatively little interest in military history, not to mention military biography, especially now as the centenary draws to a close, money to conduct research is difficult to come by. But with the recent boom in digitisation, this may offer the enterprising historian an opportunity to turn down the light emitted by Curry and Vimy and to uncover some as yet untold stories. Thank you.